Welcome back to another episode of The Entrepreneur Expat. I'm your host, Justin Keltner, and I'm joined again today with Amanda Bea. And today we're going to be talking about the top 10 reasons to live in Guadalajara, Mexico. Now,
Most people, when they think of Mexico, they think of Playa del Carmen, they think of Puerto Vallarta, Mexico City. What are some common places where American expats live? Cancun,
Mhm.
Cabo,
Ensenada.
stuff like that. But you don't really hear that much about Guadalajara. And Guadalajara is a little gem that we absolutely adore and that we chose to live in after traveling through several parts of Mexico and trying different things. So make sure to stay until the end to hear our number one reason. And in the meantime, make sure to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, comment, share it, because all those things help us get this in front of 1 million expats. Our goal is to connect expats and aspiring expats globally around the world, and we need your help to do that. And the best way to do that is to subscribe and give this video a like. So, do you want to start with reason number one
Number
or number
10.
10? Oh, we're going backwards. That's right.
So,
Haha.
reason number 10 is Guadalajara is a very, very international city. So you'll find people from obviously Mexico, you'll find people from the United States, you'll find people from Europe, from South America, literally from all over. We've met British people, we've met Colombians, we've met a lot of Americans, we've met a lot of Canadians. So it's this really big melting pot. A lot of Indians as well, and other Asians. There's people from just everywhere, everywhere, everywhere that come to Guadalajara, either in search of better lives, better lifestyle, more money. It's such a cool international city, and it's such a hub of technology and culture and things just mixed in from all over the world.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this. I recently learned, maybe you can speak more to it, but Guadalajara is almost kind of like the Silicon Valley of Latin America, or they're trying to make it the
Hmm.
Silicon Valley of Latin America, which is why you have a lot of interest of people in tech going to Guadalajara, which this tech guy likes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they're actually starting to do more events here and things like that, where you can go to different meetups of both expats and of locals in the technology scene. And we'll get into other things that they have with regards to culture and whatnot later on. But there's such a vibrant community that's also very international, and so that makes it a place where you don't feel like you're really sacrificing anything to live here. It's not like you're going into the Costa Rican jungle, which maybe that's for some people. It wasn't quite for us. We like to be around people. We like to have things close by, and having this melting pot of so many people from all around the world was definitely on our list of things in terms of what made us want to stay here in Guadalajara.
Number nine is that there's always something going on in Guadalajara because it is the second largest city in Mexico. So whether it's concerts or art exhibits, or you want to go take art classes, or we just did a holistic healing class, there's always something to do. I grew up in Miami. I grew up in a very big city. I tend to get bored very easily. And even if I like don't go do all the things, which I do find myself doing more of the things since living in Mexico because it's a little bit more of a laid back way of living than the United States. So I do find myself doing more of these things than I do in the States. There's always something happening.
Mm,
There's always something to explore in Guadalajara. So even if I don't go do it, I like having the option.
absolutely. And that brings us to number 8. There's a lot of art and a lot of culture here. So Amanda mentioned we've been taking some art classes together. There's a lot of just generally very nice art, very nice culture, and all that architecture as well. It's not like going to maybe some different places in northern Mexico or like some border towns up there, or going to an American city that maybe has only been around for 50 to 100 to 150 years. There are buildings here, what, hundreds of years old
Hundreds of
since
years old. There's a lot of
what would like the 17th century,
yeah, there's a lot
17th
of
or 18th?
colonial
Mhm.
architecture from when the Spaniards were here. Actually, I believe this was the city that had the largest population of Europeans in Mexico at one point, which would explain a lot of the architecture and also would explain a bit of the vibe. So I guess a lot of people don't realize how big of a country Mexico actually is. It's a huge country.
It is,
And a
yeah.
lot of people don't realize that. But it's kind of like, for example, you're in the United States. Florida is going to be a different vibe than Arizona, or Arizona is going to be a different vibe than New York because of the different immigration and things that they had there.
Mhm.
Mexico's the same. So in Guadalajara specifically, it's got this very interesting, unique culture, and that is kind of a little bit more of a mix with European than perhaps other Mexican cities or towns.
Yeah.
And that's because of its history.
And it almost doesn't feel like you're in Mexico, as many Westerners know it. When you're in Guadalajara, you might as well be in a European city in a lot
Yeah,
of ways.
sometimes you feel like you're in Europe, sometimes you feel like you're in Mexico.
Yeah.
It's got a cool vibe going. So the next one, and this was kind of for me, I don't know, I guess maybe we're in a different stage in our lives, but this is smaller and less chaotic than Mexico City. So we did a video recently on why so many Americans are moving to Mexico City. From my understanding, we didn't get a chance to make it, and I'll explain why momentarily. But from my understanding, Mexico City is amazing. But Mexico City is also extremely chaotic. So I will give you an example. When I first got to Mexico, we were trying to figure out, okay, well, where are we going to plant some roots? What's going to be our what do you call it when you have like
Home
a home
base?
base? What's going to
Yep.
be the home base? In Mexico, we weren't sure where it was going to be. So we were like, hey, let's go check out Mexico City. He was already in Guadalajara, didn't know if he wanted to stay here. So we planned all this travel, which is how we came up with this data. And in Mexico City, I mean, we would have been driving from Guadalajara to Mexico City. What is it, like 7, 8,
7 hours, depending on the traffic.
depending on the traffic,
And you
right?
wouldn't have even necessarily been able to bring the car.
We
It's a
may have
whole
not
other
been able to bring the car
situation. Yeah.
because in Mexico City, there's 20 million people, 22 million people living in Mexico City versus the 5 million in Guadalajara. But the pollution and the population and traffic in Mexico City is to the point where you have to register your car and then you are allowed to drive that car certain days of the week during certain times because they're trying to control all of that. Granted, tons of people live in Mexico City without a car, and
Or they just buy two cars with different
or they
plates.
just buy two cars with different plates. But even that to us was like, ooh, that sounds a little chaotic for us. We don't know if we want to deal with
Yeah.
that. So in Guadalajara, you get like a big city vibe with a lot of culture, like you would in Mexico City, with way less people and way less chaos.
So, reason number six that we love living in Guadalajara is that there are so many places that you can travel to within a fairly short car trip or a very inexpensive and short flight. One of those places is Puerto Vallarta. Puerto Vallarta has some of the most amazing, at least Pacific coast beaches in Mexico. I definitely like the beaches in Costa Rica better. But in terms of the West Coast, Puerto Vallarta has some of the nicest beaches and the surrounding area. Sayulita is another beach town close to there. You can get to both within about a what was it, 3.5, 4 hour
Yeah,
car
we
ride?
were in Sayulita in like 3.5, 4 hours.
I was driving a little fast, but yeah, it's between about a 3 to 5 hour drive to those places. Actually, Sayulita is closer. So
Yeah.
you have Sayulita, that's yeah about 3.5 hours. Puerto Vallarta is maybe another hour or so away from that, depending on traffic.
And even on the way there were so many places you could have stopped, like
Mhm.
Tequila. We stopped in Tequila on the way back, which was beautiful. Or there's places
Where they actually originally make
tequila.
tequila. That's where a
It's
lot of the
wonderful.
tequila is.
Highly recommend. Very good
Mhm.
tequila out of Tequila, Mexico. But also you can go to Lake Chapala where you'll find Ajijic, or there's a lot of like those magical towns,
Pueblos mágicos, they're
pueblos
called. Yep.
mágicos that Mexico is pretty famous for.
There's so many
There's
around
so
within
many
an
around
hour.
within an hour.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of nature nearby, but you've explored more of that than I have.
hmm there's actually a national park around the east side of Guadalajara, probably within a 45-minute or so drive from where we are now. And there's like zip lines, and you could walk through the canyon on this uh, what's it called, like a pedestrian hanging bridge type of thing, and beautiful, beautiful for hiking, for all of that. Just so many places. I mean, you have the big city life, but you can also access so much of Mexico very close by. And if you want to fly to Cancun, it's about a 3-ish hour, 3-4 hour flight, I
Or if you
believe.
want to fly to Mexico
Yeah,
City,
and
it's
it
an
would
hour and a half.
direct flight to Cancun, direct flight to Mexico City. It's very accessible from to other parts of Mexico from Guadalajara.
Which brings us to our next point, and this was actually something that was pretty important to me, is that we have an international airport with direct flights to the US, and I would venture to say this airport is a lot less confusing than Mexico City. I've heard a lot of people say that the Mexico City airport is really easy to navigate. I don't know why they think that. I thought it was nuts. I thought it was not easy to navigate at all and made no sense and was pure chaos. Found Guadalajara to be a lot simpler to navigate in the airport. But there's direct flights to the US, probably most of Latin America as well.
Yep,
There's direct flights. And if for whatever reason you can't get a direct flight, then okay, whatever. You're an hour and a half from Mexico City where you can literally fly to anywhere in the world.
that is definitely true. And in terms of airport quality, I love Guadalajara Airport. Now, granted, this is subjective, but it's a nice airport. It's very recently remodeled. They're actually doing some renovations now, but compared to like major airports in the US like LAX, absolute shit show. Miami Airport, I don't know how people travel through there without losing their minds because
I've gotten used to it.
yeah, because just the TSA there and the customs coming back into the country and all these other things, it's like American airports in general are pretty difficult, but the ones that we're used to, like on the between the West Coast and the East Coast, absolute shit show compared to the beautiful airport that we have here. You can get to the international airport from almost anywhere in the city within about a $10 or $15 taxi or Uber ride. Uh, Typically, you're not waiting in line at security more than about 15 or 20 minutes. You can walk the entire span of the airport in about 10
Well, security
minutes.
in other countries is a little bit different than airport security in the United States. Because I remember the
Yeah.
first time I came to Mexico many years ago, I was about to take off my shoes, right?
I remember this story. It's fun. Laugh.
From Cancun to Chiapas, which Chiapas is gorgeous. But flying from Cancun to Chiapas, I was about to take my shoes off, and a Mexican woman looked at me and she said this in Spanish. She goes, "You don't have to do that here. We're not savages."
Yeah, it's a lot easier to travel within Mexico than within the US.
Yeah, I would
It's a
say
lot
so.
easier. Number four, the number four reason that we really love Mexico is that they have amazing urban,
Guadalajara,
well,
Mexico.
Guadalajara, Mexico specifically. Mexico has a lot of issues with urban planning, but Guadalajara has some great urban planning.
Yeah. We can basically walk to anywhere that we need to go. We barely use the car at all. Barely use it. I think you're going to use it today. Well, we used it this week for the first time in like weeks to go to Home Depot quickly. But we barely use the car. Anything that we could possibly need, we can walk to. We can even walk to a Walmart, which I know to a lot of Americans listening to this, they're gonna be like, there's Walmarts in Mexico? Yes, there's Walmarts in Mexico. Um, so yeah, it's really good urban planning. You can walk to most places. We were just talking yesterday how like despite the fact that we haven't been able to go to the gym because there's just been a lot going on with the house, and we've also had like a lot of social activities going on, we haven't gained any weight. And I was like, probably because we walk everywhere.
True. Yeah, we get a lot of exercise, not just outside, but also just climbing up and down these stairs here. That gets a lot of the leg workouts in for sure.
And
So,
you can speak more to this. There's wonderful neighborhoods in
mhm.
Guadalajara with art and cafes and coffee shops and restaurants. So you can speak a little bit more to that because you've been here longer.
Yeah, I would say that my experience in Guadalajara with regards to like urban planning and walkability and things like that, it's a lot more similar here to, let's say, some of the cities that I've been to in Europe, like Vienna, like Budapest, like Prague. London, kind of, sort of. I mean, London's still relatively well laid out, and there's public transportation, and there's a lot of cafes and things like that, depending on what part of the city you live in. But this is more like a European city than it is a U.S. or even an average Mexican city because there is a public transportation system. I've only had to use it or chose to use it a couple times, and that was mostly for shits and giggles, to be honest, because Uber's so cheap here. But they do have a subway system. They do have a light rail system. There's extensive buses if you do rely on public transport. Granted, that's probably not going to be as good as a European city, but it still does exist and you are able to use it. And it's just that there's so many cafes everywhere. There's so many restaurants. They actually, in that urban planning department, they actually think about, having residential neighborhoods, and then there's a grocery store serving that neighborhood, and you don't have to get in your car to go absolutely everywhere. And that's huge because I don't know about you. I mean, you don't really drive, you don't really drive much, but getting in a car is just so
I
stressful.
hate it.
It's
I
so,
hate
so, so
driving. I
even
don't like it.
being a passenger, you're like, no, let's walk, let's walk. It's much easier to walk to
Yeah, and in the
places.
US, you're just accustomed to having to literally drive everywhere.
Mhm.
But here in Guadalajara, you don't have to do that. And I would say in most of the towns we went to, you wouldn't have to do that unless you're doing like a longer trip outside of the city, in which case, yeah, sure, have a car if you want to. But yeah, in the US, where we're accustomed to having to drive everywhere, it's nice to not have to do that.
Absolutely.
All right, so number three, and this one was mine. I was a little, I was a stickler about this one when we were traveling around, and I will explain why. Uh, Guadalajara is not like a Mexican beach town full of drunk Americans and Canadians. Now, there are some beach towns that are known for being more family friendly. Puerto Vallarta is one of them, and I still hated it. So I might be a little bit biased here for a few reasons. Number one, I'm Cuban, so I'm like, there's better beaches in the Caribbean if we're going to be doing the Caribbean for me to be living in a Mexican beach town. No offense, Mexicans. You have beautiful beaches. It's just, I could go to Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico and get some nicer beaches. Um, if I really wanted a beach town, I could go to Puerto Rico and not have to worry about visas or residencies or any of that. And yeah, sure, it might be more expensive, but the beaches are nicer and I don't have to worry about a visa. So it just didn't make sense to me to be in a beach town in Mexico. Also, I will admit this, I am from Miami. So I grew up on a beach. I've been in beaches my whole life. I've been dealing with heat and hurricanes for 35 years. I'm over it. I need a break. And also, the Mexican places like Cancun and Puerto Vallarta, they don't feel like Mexico. Not to me. I'm also Latina, right? So like to me, the Puerto Vallartas and the Cancuns and basically like they call it like las zonas hoteleras, so like the hotel zones and all that stuff. I mean, they're basically just built for Americans and Canadians. It does not feel like Mexico to me. To me, it was very important to integrate and basically be like, if I'm living in Mexico, I'm living with the Mexicans. That was important to me. And in Guadalajara, even though there's a whole neighborhood full of Americans and Canadians called Colonia Americana, and sometimes they do tend to stay in their bubble. It's not as bad as the Vallartas or the Cancuns or the Cabos.
Yeah, you go to one of those places, and unfortunately, and I know a lot of people that live in places like Playa del Carmen, and they have a great
Oh
time,
yeah, Playa del Carmen's
but
another
most of them
one.
don't
Yeah,
speak Spanish.
yeah.
And most of them would prefer to be around other Americans versus around Mexicans, which is totally fine. But in our opinion, it just wasn't well, it just wasn't what spoke to us. We didn't want to be in this like isolated bubble in another country with just people from our own country. It just didn't really make a lot of sense. And I also don't like. I love the beaches, by the way. I'm a huge fan of the beaches. I grew up in California, so I was within about an hour from the beach most of my life, and I love the ocean. I love the beach. It's definitely a place of well, wellness, a place of connection, a place of just
Calm.
calm, like
Yeah.
getting back into nature. But the beach towns here.
Don't feel like any of that.
They don't feel like any of that. They feel like the place where Americans go to just get rowdy and do things that might be illegal or frowned upon in their own country. And nah, it just wasn't really our vibe. So we ended up deciding to stay here in Guadalajara. Now, reason number two that we love Guadalajara so much is how amazing the food is here. So much better than any of those little beach towns. There, yeah, you might get decent tacos, but anything that's Asian food, French food, any other kind of cuisine, international cuisine, just wasn't really great at all. It was pretty mediocre, and most of the food in general was pretty mediocre outside of the big cities that we've traveled to. The food in Guadalajara is absolutely amazing.
Top notch.
Riquísimo.
Top notch food. Not just the Mexican cuisine, but also international cuisine in Guadalajara is amazing. Number one, I think the food quality in Mexico in general is just better than in the United States. But there's something about and I've heard the same thing about Mexico City, by the way, that it's a total foodie city. So is Guadalajara. Guadalajara is a foodie city without the chaos of Mexico City. But yeah, I mean, I haven't had a single bad meal in Guadalajara, whether it's from a fruit stand around the corner, or if it's a French restaurant or a Mexican restaurant. I just haven't had a bad meal the entire time I've been in Guadalajara. And this is just because of cost of living. It's so cheap. I mean, what's that little breakfast place that we went to, or those little lunch places around the
Oh
corner?
yeah, you could get lunch here for
100
4 or five
pesos a
dollars
person.
each. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like huge plates of like homemade food, or even the food delivery service that we use. It's homemade food. It's homemade food and it is delicious. All right, so reason number one is the weather. So in Guadalajara, we're kind of like in the middle of a valley surrounded by mountains, and that makes the weather a lot cooler. I would say it's kind of like California weather in Guadalajara.
Actually, yeah,
Yeah.
it's very close to California. A lot of people have compared it to like LA weather or
Yeah.
Bay Area weather. And there is certainly a rainy season, so there are about 2.5 months a year or so, 2.5, 3 months per year, that it is raining at least for 30 minutes, for an hour a day, sometimes a little bit more in the afternoons and in the evenings. But it's still pleasant, even with the rain. It's not like it's raining and it's just super cold, to be all bundled up like in the Midwest in the winter or
It's not
yeah.
extreme weather
There's
in
yeah, there's really no
Guadalajara. It's very
extreme weather
temperate
here.
climate. As
You
a
really don't need air conditioning.
we don't have air conditioning in this
Yeah.
house because you don't need it. You don't need it. I mean, you could put an air conditioning unit if you want to, but you don't actually need it. And it's just beautiful weather all the time. It's definitely more California weather as opposed to the beaches where you feel like you're in the ninth circle of hell.
And it's
And it's
humid, you're
humid and you're
sweating, and
sweating
your
all the
hair
time.
is a mess all the
Yeah.
time.
I mean, I guess if you grew up in a place like Chicago, because we did meet a lot of Americans in the beach towns, like that's awesome because you've never been around a beach in your life. But from
Mhm.
someone from Florida and California, and again, as I said, I've been dealing with humidity, heat, and hurricanes my whole life. I need a break.
Fair.
Um, so that's our number one reason is the
You
weather.
really can't beat it.
You can't beat it. You cannot beat the weather in Guadalajara. I do hear Mexico City is somewhat similar to Guadalajara, but again, nice weather without the chaos of Mexico City. And actually, here's a bonus, and I don't know if this is I've heard that in Mexico City, there's a bit more kind of friction between the American expats and people living in Mexico City.
Like
Um,
yeah, they
they
clash
clash
a
a
lot.
little bit more. So this is the bonus. I've not experienced that at all in Guadalajara. At all. Everybody here's been very welcoming. Guadalajara is known for being kind of like a more progressive, open city
Yeah,
more recently and more welcoming of people. Although I am told that's relatively new because Guadalajara did not used to be like that, from what I'm told. But because Guadalajara is a bit more progressive and open, it seems that there's less friction between Mexicans and everybody coming here from all over the world.
definitely. I've always felt very welcome here, and the people are super, super nice and friendly.
All right, guys, so those are our top 10 and a bonus reason why we chose Guadalajara, Mexico over maybe the more popular places in Mexico that people hear about all the time. Guadalajara is a little gem that we absolutely adore and love. So if you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe because we have new videos and podcasts coming out every single week, including We're going to start having interviews with experts that can help you maybe more with tax planning, or we're going to be talking to other 6 and 7 figure expat entrepreneurs on their stories of how they did it so you can learn from them.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon on another episode.